What's up, everybody? I'm back. It's been a minute. And that is because I moved from Sierra Vista to Tucson. So now here we are in our new location, but I don't really like the way it looks. It's kind of dreary and doesn't make for a good YouTube film set to do car stuff in. So I want to put a little extra effort into making that look cool. Let's switch it up. Let's do a little rearranging, get it ready, and then we're going to do a coilover install, but I've already filmed the coilover install and that gets kind of boring to rewatching. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a video about tips and tricks on what you need to know for installing your coilovers, how to set them up, how to adjust the bump travel, etc. Stuff like that. So as soon as we get this all cleaned up, we'll be right back with a proper coilover tips and tricks guide. All right. Alright, there we go. We got some lighting behind me for the car. We've got lighting on the back wall. I've got some knickknacks, hung up back there to make the scene a little more interesting. We got the car in the shot. I think we're ready to start. The first thing we're going to need to do is pull the spring off of our coilover and then reassemble it without the spring so that we can put it on the car and compress it all the way to see where it hits the bump stop. Alright, so we've got our coilover here, and the first thing I'm going to need to do is remove the top hat. And I've also got a different top hat here to install. So I'm actually going to reinstall it with this top hat because that's what I'm going to be using. But first, we need to ditch the spring, ditch the cover so that we can see the dust boot. Keep this on so we can see where we're hitting the bump stop. So we're going to reinstall just the shock with our top hat, spring perch, top hat. So now we're going to install this in the car as such, and this is going to allow us to compress the shock and show us where the wheel is going to end up when we're hitting the bump stops. So now we can jack up this control arm and see exactly where So now we've jacked up the control arm and the spindle until the bump stop is compressed. Basically, it's taken the entire weight of the car on this one corner. So now I'm going to adjust the lower portion of the shock to limit the bump travel to where I won't rub. Because if I put the wheel on right now, just as the way these coilovers came from the factory, my tire would be rubbing on the top here. And of course, we don't want any sort of rubbing at all under full compression. So as you can see, I'm hitting my fender along here already, and if we are to turn it, I would also be rubbing in the back, right here. So this is obviously the maximum bump travel that my car is able to have with this diameter wheel and tire package. What I plan to do eventually is go to 17s, I think, and do like a 235/40 17, which will, I think, take off about an inch for overall diameter. So we want to set probably right here as the maximum travel. Nope, I'm still rubbing in the back, so we'll let it down some more. Still rubbing. Still rubbing. I'm just checking the back here. Let me get you guys in there so you can see. Okay, so as you can see, the limiting factor for me actually isn't the fender, but it's going to be this inner lip here where my tire rubs. And here it's just barely rubbing. So that there is the limiting factor for my bump travel in the front. Because I'm drifting and I'm going to have the wheels cranked over like this and hitting bumps and stuff, I know that I want to be able to not rub in that position. If this was more of a road race car, maybe I'd be a little more lenient and know that the chances of me turning like this and this side compressing up would be minimal. I might actually give myself a little more room and allow it to rub there under full lock, because that wouldn't happen normally like grip driving, because this would always be the inside of the turns. This would be the unloaded or least loaded side of the car. But with drifting, this is the loaded side of the car, so it's likely that we would compress the suspension to this point to where this would rub, chew up the tire, etc. And even with the corner of my tire is a little bit worn down to the wear bars, because I had flipped them. It was the inside in the past. So I know for a fact that I'm going to rub here, and I probably want to give myself just a little more leeway actually than this. I probably want to give myself on a fresh tire something like that amount of room. So now what I can do, I can move over to my coilover and I can see how much of a difference I need to make up on the coilover. So as you can see, with my tire touching that part on the chassis, there's actually 2 more inches of suspension stroke in the upward direction. And that's exactly what I want to limit now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to extend the shock body to compress the bump stop. And that's going to prevent the tire from traveling any further up and allowing the bump stops to be utilized before the tire hits the chassis. As you can see, as I'm extending the shock, the travel here is decreasing, but the wheel is staying in the same position. So I'm just going to continue this. So here we have a compressed bump stop, and the tire is free to rotate in any position. It doesn't hit the fender, it doesn't hit anything else. So this is where I'm going to set my shock body for its height. And essentially all that the shock body does is it moves where the center of your suspension travel is, up or down. So now we've limited the maximum bump travel for the car. We know that it's not going to rub on the fender or anything like that under full stroke, full compression. And we're going to go ahead and remove the coilover now and install the spring, and then we'll set the ride height at the spring. So what I'm going to do to make this measurement easy is I'm just going to measure it from the bottom straight up. So it looks like we're at 2 1/4. So 2 1/4 is going to be my setting on the other shock, and then we'll be adjusting the ride height here. And it's obviously going to have to go down because it's just going to be sitting far too high for me as it is. Now if I wanted to maximize my suspension stroke, then that would be the ride height I probably want, which that and bump steering, some other, suspension characteristics is why all the FD cars are riding around like freaking 4x4. Now, what a lot of people do is they lower it by the lower perch, and that, of course, would change our bump travel, which we just took a lot of time to figure out what we needed for our bump travel. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to lower it from the spring perch here. And I gauge I need to lower it about 2 inches. Now I know that because this is inboard of the wheel, it's not 1-to-1. It's not going to be 2 inches lowers the car 2 inches, here. And actually where I'm measuring is from a spot on the frame rail to the floor, not from the wheel to the fender, because my fenders might not be in exactly the same position. The frame rail is a great spot to measure from. I want to lower it about 1.5 inches. So I'm just going to take this down about 1.5 inches. Which will leave me with a 2-inch, we'll go with a 2-inch gap there. This is going to change a little bit as we corner weight the car, which will be coming in a future episode. And now, so we're going to lock this down, and you'll see that I do have some, about an inch worth of suspension droop missing. So if I want to utilize that droop travel, I'm going to need to get some helper springs, and they just assist pushing the wheel down when it would be up in the air otherwise. Okay, for the back, it's the same thing as the front. You also want to make sure when you're fully compressed that you don't have any binding of your axle. So we did the same thing. We extended the shock until the bump stop stopped the travel upwards and there is no rubbing going on up here. I test fitted with a wheel, and then a lot of times you might find that your spring now comes loose, but BC did a good job sizing this shock so that it actually still holds the spring tight. Alright guys, that's it for this coilover install, or the tips and tricks guide. I'm going to go ahead and just put on the wheels and set it down. Everything else is pretty straightforward. When we come back next time, we're going to be showing you some previous footage working on my son's new car, the IS300, and then we're going to be finally finishing up the handbrake on this. I got a few other odds and ends, and we'll be doing an alignment and stuff. And then, finally, I think it's been a year now, we'll actually get to doing some drifting again. God, it's been far too long. I'll catch you guys next time. Thanks. Peace.